Welcome to Art Talk. I'm Patricia Shippee, your host of Through the Eyes of the Artist, a program that focuses on art from a human perspective by getting to know the artists, their attitudes, motivations, and even their lifestyles, all the things that influence their personal artistic expression, giving us an opportunity to understand and to vicariously participate in the creation of art, and to see our world through the eyes of the artist. Today's Art Talk is as much about speed, motion, and automobiles as it is about art, which, as you know from our series, takes in many forms, just within the visual arts. While sculptor Duran has only recently returned to the world of art, his career as an architect with a passion for motor racing fused when he decided to combine his love of form, addiction to motion, and mechanical skills into sculpture. Born in Chicago and educated as an architect at the University of Illinois and Princeton University, he also studied sculpture there under professors Frank Gallo and Joe Brown. After completing his studies in art and architecture, Lee had a brief career in teaching as an associate professor at Illinois and Ball State and as a visiting lecturer critic at Rhode Island School of Design, Harvard University, and at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. He then embarked on a career in architecture with frequent diversions into motor racing and auto restoration. He's had a lifelong involvement with machines, racing hydroplanes, motorcycles, and cars. And while continuing his architectural practice and restoring cars, he also works on his sculpture series, which we're going to talk about today, which has been shown in galleries from Connecticut to California. Welcome to Art Talk, Lee.
Thank you, Patricia. Nice to be here.
Quite a background.
It's been fun.
Well, I'm sure it has. Your work is fun. But I want to first, if you will, help me fuse, just as you did, architecture, design, and then sculpture. All of those things.
As a process?
Yeah, yeah.
Of course, the discipline of architecture is really a resoluting form and spatial problems and programmatic requirements, client needs. And so you take a number of various disciplines and kind of wed them together to get something to happen. The form of architecture isn't necessarily the best medium that I found to use in sculpture. My early work was pretty much wed to the notion of architecture, architectural forms, trying to enclose spaces with planes, doing things like this.
So this is an earlier series.
Yes.
Which to me very much relates to architecture. Form, certainly, space.
And it's hollow. It's really very volumetric, and it was sort of a volumetric thinking that generated these kinds of forms. I tried to adapt the architectural forms to figures, and I wound up with buildings on stilts and various forms, but they weren't really human forms.
Well,
they weren't round forms.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that fascinates me about your work, because we're going to go view Lee's studio and home, and you're going to see a lot of edges, hard edges, and here we have edges. And then the whole evolution changed to these rounded, streamlined forms. But I want to go back to design, architecture, and then Art Deco, and that was a whole very important, influential design period.
It was a period in which everybody was very optimistic about what could be done with technology, what could be the love affair of actually being able to move, to be able to travel, and there was such an optimism in the way it was expressed, and in architecture, sometimes it just got stuck on, but the most interesting aspects of Art Deco really were in the design of things that you used, things that you held.
Function.
And in some cases, vehicles, that the automobiles, the Art Deco impact on the automobile was really a fascinating thing. It took it out of the old Edwardian, carriage notion, and invested it with a sort of a thing in its own right, a real sense of elegance in its own vocabulary, which was this movement.
Marrying, as you have talked about in your work, function with form into an elegant whole. I mean, that's what you've been doing. Yes, that's what it's all about. But you have gone, I mean, in your architecture, function is very much a part of it. And
it's a requirement. You're not working for yourself, you're working for other people, you're working for clients.
Yeah.
And so you have to acknowledge first and foremost who's paying the bills, which is the client and the client's needs.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a little different notion. There's room for whimsy, but it shouldn't be whimsy in itself. It should have something that's going to last, hopefully a couple centuries anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Let's tie in before we go to our tape of what we filmed the other day, to your interest is in cars and speed and how that ties into your present work.
Okay, how do we start this process? We're going to talk about what happens in here first, or?
Well, no, I just want to know, when did you first become so interested in cars and speed?
Oh, I think I was probably about 6 months old. I've just always been fascinated by things that move by themselves. And when I was a child, I made toys. Put wheels on sticks, start out with, to make them move around. And
okay.
I can remember when I was a kid, just sitting by the curbside, looking at cars that went by, because they had their own life. They could move under their own power.
So the fascination was at a very early age.
I'm
with
afraid
cars
so.
and speed. No, that's okay. I think it's great. Well, let's go now. And I mean, everyone's so interested in an artist's surroundings and the life that they live. So we're going to share that with our audience, and we're going to go now and look at cars and your studio. What a wonderful day we had together there. Lee, it was all reflections. Even initially on the car, I'm sure the camera had some problems with in and out, because that's what your work is all about. Even your architectural work, reflections.
It's probably the underlying theme in a lot of what I do. The form, to me, isn't simply something that's defined by walls, but it's defined by light and how the light models the form. And with the highly polished pieces, the reflection is the form. It becomes much more a strong element than the shape itself. And so you start to model the piece of sculpture to generate the reflection, just to get that particular piece of kind of captured fire, just going to sliding along and moving.
So light has to do with reflections. Light and speed really have a lot to do with reflections. I'm beginning to understand that. So really, those are your elements. Just as a painter would think of color, you're thinking of light and reflected light.
And how to make a piece have the sense of being moving along even while it's stationary. The notion of just doing a piece, trying to make it look fast. Automobile designers try and design cars, and they design them, and they think, wow, this looks like a fast shape. And you put it out in the street, and the reflection is wrong on the shape, and it looks like it's parked or it's going backwards. You have to really concentrate on that, on where the lines are going to be and how they're going to caress the form to make it look like it's going fast.
Caress. Well, that's the streamlining, and it can work or not work, right? I mean,
absolutely. It can be a villain. The camera in some of those shots was trying to show the pieces, and the camera was focusing and unfocusing, trying to latch onto the light, because the light actually tends to stand away from the sculpture a little bit. It jumps away, and it tricks the eye. Though the human eye can perceive these forms much better than the camera ever could possibly dream of doing.
So this is really also interesting in terms of movement, light, movement, and speed. All of these things have fused, again, using the word fused, into your current work, which is so different from where you came from originally.
I've been trying all my life to overcome my background. I'm just in some areas starting to succeed.
Oh gosh. Well, let's come back in a minute. We're going to first take a break for a public service announcement, and we'll be right back.
Art is a process that fills our lives. See it, enjoy it. This public service announcement is brought to you by the Griffiths Arts Center, New London, Connecticut.
Welcome back to Art Talk. We're visiting with Lee Duran and looking at his newest series of chrome goddesses as well as chariots. Lee, I'm curious, when did you begin this new series? I mean, and how did you get inspired to do them?
Well, the series started actually in my mind a while before I actually decided to kind of go and build them. And I've been doing a lot of work in restoring automobiles and making parts for obsolete engines, and I was doing all these casting pieces, and at the same time looking at what was happening in the world of automotive art, which tends to be more of a very, very conservative world, actually. Other than the graphic arts end of the automotive art, most of automotive sculpture was things that looked exactly like the car the individual would own, or they were cartoons of the cars individuals owned.
Is there such a thing as automotive art?
Yes, there is, and it's actually it's been a field that has existed since the first automobile, and some very interesting and well-known painters and sculptors have tried their hand at it. The Michelin Corporation in France did a great deal to foster the art of the automobile back in the early teens and 20s, and still does to some extent. Oh. And but they were depicting, for marketing purposes, the theme of the auto and the notion of travel, because if you traveled, then you would use their tires, you wore out their tires, you bought more. It was good commerce.
Yeah, yeah.
But most of the art tended to look very much like a car or something, and it didn't look to me like what was really happening to the thing. A motorcycle has a movement all of its own.
Yes.
It's sort of a magical movement because it's very much as like flying as you can get and still remain in contact with the ground. And so it banks and it twists and it moves around. And the rider isn't simply somebody that's placed on top of this thing. No, the rider's kind of wrapped around the motorcycle. You're part of it.
You've got
because
to
you
be.
have to move with the machine.
Harmony.
And in complete harmony. So there's this fusion, this melting of the participant and the vehicle.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is actually what generated that first piece, the solo, which is this outermost piece, which the rider is just completely one with the machine. And that piece was designed to move like a motorcycle. Sitting on a normal pedestal, it tilts, it banks, and you can move it around. And so that was going along in my mind while I was contemplating starting the series, and that and this one which I call Chariot, which is actually this three-wheel piece with the machine and man all wrapped up in a one form.
Yeah.
And so that they're indistinguishable.
Right, right. But you mentioned casting, and we're going to go in a minute to your home again, and we're going to talk about process, because it was in the sand casting of automobile parts that must have generated some creative thinking for you. So we're going to come back to that after we go and talk a little bit, see some pieces, talk about process, and then we'll really get into process when we come back. Let's go now. Art talk out here, and we have a lot to talk about with Lee, because we've already seen the perspective of the architecture, the cars, and the precision of each part, including those shiny surfaces of the car. Now we have shiny surfaces of art pieces. And Lee, you have to please take me through all the work you do to get to the finished product.
Well, the finish is a part of the original concept anyway, because you're really visualizing this whole process with the shiny thing as the element in the end. So
you have that already in your mind before you begin the whole subject.
Absolutely, it's an integral component of the essence of the piece, because the magic is in this reflection. And so you're
have you visualized this piece before you even began to put it together?
In a way, in that I'm seeing these lines and these lights and highlights, which are actually the shape of the piece is defined by its highlights and its reflections more than its overall form.
Did you get to that from the car parts that you were making at sand casting? Or, I mean, did they have reflective parts?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, they
Yeah.
did.
Well, because there also this tactile element of handling them. They're nice. They're nice to touch. You always
and that's
want
what
to
all
feel
your
it.
work is about. I mean, I'm going to sit with this, if I may.
It's just fingerprints.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, they're happy. What is this material?
That's a cast polyester resin that's used to stabilize the piece, and it's a harder material than clay. Working initially with the idea in clay so I can change it rapidly, and then I make a silicone rubber mold to extract the image off the clay, so I can work with something that actually has reflections. Because
And then you cast?
then once I build it up to a finish that I can actually see the light hitting it and get that right, then I'll pull a casting and polish it to the final finish, and then evaluate it. And sometimes you may have to change the lines because they're not the reflections aren't right.
Yeah, yeah. And then you'll do a series of these, of course. This is the Chrome Goddess series.
Yes,
of it?
yes.
Yeah, yeah. We'll see some of the finished pieces. This is really. Let me. Yeah, you've got one of the finished pieces there.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Great,
And
great.
that's the.
So here you are. Now tell me, knowing how you've got to do hands-on, you've got to think this through. There's about 6 processes in between. How do you get from here to there? Is that easy for you to describe in 12 sentences?
Well, once this piece is not just merely a representation of the final piece, but it's also a castable form. So every piece that I make like this has to be something that can be extracted from the sand.
Yeah.
And so there's been a lot of trial and error in shaping the piece so that it is castable. So this one happens to be a whole form, and it is castable. It's
one piece.
It's a one-piece casting.
They not all are, so we'll see some of that in your studio, I think, so that we can see it, the parts. This one happens to be one. Does it keep changing from here to there? I mean,
absolutely. Actually, this pattern now, this was an early one, and I keep changing the faces.
Yeah.
And this face has evolved into a different expression.
So for each cast, you change the face just to make it more interesting.
It imparts a sort of an individuality to the piece.
Indeed.
And it's sort of fun. I like the idea that they're not all the same. Just because the process can reproduce the general form, the signature of the artist should somehow kind of be in the metal, and so that's part of what it is.
The change of it, yeah. Although it's an addition, is it not? I mean, this piece is an addition, or when you change the face, it's still the same addition.
It's still the same addition, but it just sort of keeps evolving.
Has a bit of a change.
And you can put them, if you put them all together in the addition, you'd find these different expressions. And while they're all sort of the same family of forms, they have personalities.
Yeah. I find it very interesting that the surface and the reflections is your key, first of all. Secondary is the subject, almost. I mean, the subject is obviously speed.
Absolutely.
The mascot, cars, racing, but how you get there is just amazing to me. That's the architectural background, the steps to build something. Is it necessary for you to build?
It is. I have to make them. I think part of it goes back to when I was in high school being forbidden to take shop. That really, I was appalled. I wanted to follow a career in engineering. I didn't know I was going to become an architect at the time.
Yeah.
And they said, well, if you're going into college, you can't take shop. And I was just blown away by this. And
you wanted hands-on.
The head can't function without the hands. And so I all this work that I've done since I started my own career, my own business, has been to basically build whatever it is that I designed. And whether it was architecture or cars or sculpture. I could never, I just couldn't lay claim to the fact that I did something if I'd merely written a check to somebody else to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
I have to do it.
Yeah, yeah. But from ground up.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
that's the best part.
Yeah.
It
Oh,
just-
good. Well, let's go see from ground up. Let's go down into one of Lee's studios and just see some of the processes to get to these beautiful finished products. I've asked Lee to show us one of his workrooms so you can understand this beautiful, pristine work of art that you've seen, how it gets done. It doesn't just happen. There are many hard working steps to it. So that's what I want you to take us through, if you would, Lee. Show the complexity of the chrome goddess.
Well, it all starts with an idea, and sometimes it's an emotion, sometimes it's just kind of an abstract idea of what kind of a shape you want to have happen. And sometimes I'll make a doodle. I do a lot of thinking in airplanes sometimes, because it's sort of kind of captive, and you're moving, and it's sort of an exciting thing. And I'll do a little sketch, and this is it's a really rough idea of just sort of this happens to be a sphere I wanted to see a shape emerge from. And then I mock it up in something that's workable.
But you've already had the concept of the shiny surface before you've even done the drawing.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's in there. It's what's kind of driving it along.
Okay.
And
so the picture is here, and then you go with the hand to a drawing, and then all these steps.
Figure out how to resolve it into a form. And in this case, was trying to make something on a sphere, and still do it in a sand casting process. So this is a shape that I'm trying to do that can be cast in sand, and so all the perspective and all the dynamics of the shape have to expand into the background, sort of the reverse of a perspective. But that's so you can enable it to be placed in the sand and pulled out
for this process.
For the process.
Okay.
So every decision is tempered by the casting process as well. It's a nice editor. It keeps
it
you honest.
confined to what you. Yeah. Okay.
And so this thing will continue to evolve along until I'm happy with the shape. It's worn a couple of different headdresses and a couple of different faces.
Certainly different lips.
You know, it's got different lips. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it will probably, before it's all done, even when it's in the metal, change its shape again. And so you build it to that level, and then you've got to take this now and make it something you can actually start to work with, because the clay is way too soft. And actually, if you put the lights over it, it actually gets gooey. And what we need to do is get to something that's a castable material.
Which is?
I use a concoction of polyester resin and little foam beads, and that makes a material that's kind of almost like bone.
And then, do you do that right here?
Yes. What we do is we'll take one of these. This happens to be the motorcycle form, which is this thing here.
Piece, yeah.
And this thing was, when it was in clay, it was embedded in the clay, and the pattern was lifted.
This form.
And the pattern was lifted off of it in this form into this rubber mold.
All right.
And then.
So you do that right here.
Right here. This is my science lab.
Okay. Polyester resin.
You mix all these nasty things and you cast them up.
Yeah.
And then you withdraw a sort of a nice hard thing.
All right.
And then this can be worked on to make the casting mold, because it still has to be able to be
shaped and
it still has to be able to be made in metal. And you can make a lot of things in clay and plastic that you can't actually get out of the foundry. So everything from here then has to be made into a castable form. And we use whatever means necessary to
Is it trial and error?
With these materials, there's a lot of error. There are some castings that come out so gooey that you never think you're going to ever get them off your hands when you're done.
Well, you started this whole thing, though, with car parts, when you needed a part of a car. But is this different from that?
No,
not really.
That's That's a piece for my car.
Okay.
Here.
Oh, there you go. All right, same desk.
This is the
All
same
right.
desk. I'm trying to recreate a piece for a restoration for my old Indy car.
All right.
And this happens to be the hubcap. This is an impression of the remaining hubcap that was on the automobile.
Special something or other. Yeah.
And so you take this process and you make it.
So the practical aspect of working in the casting foundry triggered the artistic.
Yes, because it's an industrial process.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. You took it another step.
I just kind of took the nice pieces and the aesthetics of it,
Yeah.
and said, well, why can't we make art with it too?
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a natural, and it has a repeatability in the casting process that I like, because I like multiples,
And building.
and you can build on them,
Yeah.
and you can, and then you can take a piece like this or a casting and then fabricate it and combine it with another element. That's how you make all these stuff you see around here.
Well,
the
what
engines
is
and
this
things.
stuff? Can you walk us through some of this?
Well, this is sort of my clay pile over here, and
Yeah, all
we're
right.
working on pieces, and then we get the larger machining parts. This is a big vertical mill, and so bandsaw. But basically, I'm working on trying to make and restore like old. This is an obsolete engine part that was made in 1928, and I'm restoring that particular engine, which is a mate to the one I have in my race car, and I have to make the parts. And so sometimes you machine a piece, and sometimes you're casting components, and you make all sorts of patterns, and eventually you get all the pieces assembled, and you can put them together and make a nice functional.
So you've gone from functional to, what should we call them?
Well,
Do you have a name for this series of mascots?
They're called chariots. Actually, is the name of the series.
All right. Yeah. Great.
And it's and the Chrome Goddess is the latest iteration of the chariot series.
I can't wait to see that big one that you're working on.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
the sleeping form.
Yeah. Great. Good. Well, thanks. We're going to go back to the studio now and talk some more. Well, as you can see, there are a myriad of processes that Lee goes through in order to finish a piece. And you should know, and I'll say this and then you can correct me, Lee. You started out by making functional parts of cars, working on your racing cars. And you actually started sand casting these pieces of cars that will work.
Engine
Functional.
parts, yes.
Okay, engine parts.
Engine parts.
And you found these parts as they came out of the sand beautiful.
Absolutely. I mean, they combine all the best. You know, they're the proper shape for something. So they have not only a function but a form that really works.
Yeah.
And with the casting process, there generally can be very few superfluous elements. It's got to be right. It's got to be all the things there. So it's a marvelous editorial process, the casting process, because you generally can't stick useless things on because you can't cast them then.
It's got to be, you've designed the shape, and then you make the shape, and then you fit all the shapes together.
Right.
I'm simplifying
Yes,
it, but yeah. Okay.
So
can you show me here, for instance, it's assemblage.
It is. There's fabrication and assemblage, and a marvelous spatial game that occurs when you do this. In order to create a piece like this, you can't simply plunk it down in the sand and have it work. So this piece actually is cast in a number of components, and you take the body off, and then the wheels are cast separately.
Right.
And
there goes another.
the other part,
right.
this all has to be done this way because in order to put this piece in the sand, placed in the sand like so,
Right.
And extract it, you couldn't just lift it up whole. So these little pins are designed so you can pull this part out, and then you can sneak this part out of the sand. So there's this spatial problem that occurs in the creation of the piece.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get it out of the sand, this is loose, the wheels are loose, but the front wheel is now part of the
whole.
form.
Yeah.
Then you take all these pieces and remove all the various foundry pertinences. This is a place that the metal was fed.
Right. Oh, yes,
And
yes.
see, the metal was fed in here, and it was actually, you can sort of see the little place where it was actually vented.
Yeah.
And when you get all these feeds and risers cut off, then you grind everything and grind and grind and grind and grind.
That's when you take it home. This is the part you take home.
This is what you get.
It's
This is
aluminum.
what you get back. Yes, this is
Okay.
this is aluminum. And then you
Although
have to-
you've worked with other metals.
yes,
Okay.
bronze, manganese, bronze.
Yeah.
I like aluminum because the finish is very sensual when it's polished, and it gives you the impression that the finish goes clear through the piece.
Yeah, and it reflects
It-
most, I
It does.
assume.
It does.
Yeah.
It's you can polish it to an absolute mirror luster, and at the same time, it has this marvelous integrity to it that it just really flows. And when you fabricate with it, all the welds, which you have to do to weld this whole thing together, can be ground and polished and produce an absolutely seamless whole. So it becomes just a big piece of liquid metal, and is kind of just
filled with-
coalesced right in before your eyes.
Yeah, yeah, it's all one part. How about scale, Lee? How do you determine the scale of each piece? I mean,
Some of them are casting problems.
oh, really? Could you
In a
do
sense.
it? Could you do, like, a racing car is not as big as a regular car? Could you
Casting.
actually sand cast that big or
Not in one piece,
Yeah.
not from a practical standpoint, because if you try to cast it all in one piece, the metal would become so thick that the core would never cool. It'd be like the center of the earth. You know,
Yeah.
we have this little kind of hot core that forever. So you'd cast it in pieces and enclose some volume with it. But you could indeed, you cast locomotives. But most locomotives were all sand cast.
I didn't know
And
that.
something that
Yeah.
large
Yeah.
essentially is a sand casting. There are fabricated elements within it, but most of those big pieces you see were all cast in a sand cast foundry.
Wow, amazing. Well, what about the architectural mind of yours and the artist's mind? Are they very different?
Some days. Some days.
I mean, there's so many elements here. Having seen your home and the precision that you work in and all the surfaces and then the aerodynamics, I mean, are there different parts of your creative self or does it blend?
Sometimes when I'm lucky it blends. There are times when I'm not so lucky and it doesn't. But that one of the disciplines of both architecture, the automotive aspect of restoration, and the scrutiny that's involved both in the architectural product, which is much different than a normal art product in that you've got a paying customer and generally is not an inexpensive item.
Sure.
And the customer client expects a high level of resolution of a very high accuracy.
Right.
And that translates itself into finish as well. And the same thing happens in the automotive end of things. You finish a car for a restoration, and it is going to be examined in a very, very close level of scrutiny, and basically like as if it would be judged in a concours. And so the finish has to be very, very good.
So in the creative process, in your own mind, you're the demander, if I
That's
may.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Which is a different kind of a challenge. I have one last question, and then I guess we're running out of time again. But do you feel, Lee, that you're sacrificing any part of your other self to be an artist? I mean, the practical side of life and so on. But because you're suddenly now, to me, you're an artist. I mean,
It's a different part of my life now.
Yeah.
In some ways, the architectural end of things you were sort of an acceptable citizen.
People expect artists to be odd.
Right,
That's
and not that they've expected a great deal of architects, but perhaps at least they placed them, in a respectability category that artists, unfortunately, are not in our society expected to share.
Yeah.
Artist is supposed to be a bit of an outlaw. Unfortunately, sometimes that's nice.
Yeah.
Because it gets rid of stupid questions, but at the same time, it doesn't. people tend to think of art as superfluous, something outside of their life, and it's not. It's right there. It's,
Yeah.
as good architecture should be. It should be like right in your
there.
life.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Lee. And that's what Art Talk is all about. Art is life, and life is art. Thank you for joining us for this week's Art Talk. I hope you've enjoyed visiting with Lee Duran and in his studio and learning all about speed, motion, cars, and art. Until next time, I'm Patricia Shippee.